accommodate. Well, I want to share something with you on this morning. When babies arrive, we've got to reorder our lives in light of what their advent or their presentation represents. It's interesting to consider that we find ourselves looking at the words of Isaiah hidden and tucked within the Old Testament, speaking to a time where the prophet is offering a long-sighted yet very near perspective of what God is doing in the cosmos. It's interesting because if we look at these particular words, for to us a child is born, he is suggesting that in the midst of the judgment and the chaos and the calamity of the text, God has a way of still birthing fresh life into what looks like a dead situation. And you might be saying to yourself, Pastor McKee, how do you know that? Well, you've got to go back to chapter 7 of Isaiah, because Isaiah tells the king of Israel, Ahaz, that a virgin will conceive. And after telling Ahaz, he says, well, you know, after I tell you this, you've got to ask the Lord yourself for a sign of what God is going to do. And so Ahaz, the king, receives this sign, and the sign is this, that a virgin will conceive, and that his name shall be called Emmanuel. It's interesting when we consider this, because the writers of the Gospels pick this up and understand that this was a prophetic utterance that was not just necessary for the time of King Ahaz, but it pointed to a time that was yet coming. In other words, whenever God gives a word of judgment, God also gives a word of comfort. And that might not be good news for everybody under the sound of my voice on this morning, but there are some of us who know that we oscillate from places of blessing and punishment. We stand in between places of judgment and experiencing the redemptive and reconciliatory power of our great God. Let me help you out. The same God who will get you together is the same God that will bless you in ways that you can't even imagine. I know it's Christmas morning. I know you're waiting for me to get to the story, but I'm already there. You've got to understand something. The story of Christmas is that God shows up for you despite the fact that you don't deserve it. Now, this might not be for everybody under the sound of my voice, but I need a few folk on this morning who can testify that I don't deserve for God to show up in my life like God does. I don't deserve for God to show up blessing me. I don't deserve for God to keep on protecting me. But even when I'm at my worst, God still shows up with his best. Is there anybody on this Christmas morning who can testify that God has always showed up for me with the best that he has to offer, with more grace than I could imagine, with more mercy than I can contain, with more joy than I can understand, with more peace than I can ever process? God keeps on showing up. Now, I've got to help you out, because at the Church of Oakland, we've been celebrating Advent. We've been talking about the reality that Jesus is the Son of God, and almost every week we hit a grace point in the sermon, Pastor, where we talked about the reality that God will show up. And I need somebody on this Christmas morning to give God some praise that not only will God show up, but look at somebody, they might be a little sleepy. I know we got up real early in our house. We had to make breakfast. We had to open gifts. We had to do all that good thing. Why don't you go ahead and nudge them and tell them, wake up, because you've got to understand not only will God show up, but watch this, God has already showed up on your behalf. That is why in Isaiah chapter 7, it is important to understand that the child is called Emmanuel, which means that God is with us. And I don't know what you're going through on this Christmas morning, because let me share something with you. As you grow and mature, the innocence and the joy of Christmas begins to change. You could be wrestling with anything on Christmas Day. You could be dealing with the reality that a loved one who once walked with you is no longer with you. You could be struggling with the fact that you didn't have as much money as you expected to have at the end of the year, and you can't do everything that you planned on doing. You could be dealing with the fact that your family is falling apart, and there's somebody who you wish you could pick up the phone and call, and you really don't feel like it because things aren't where they are. Why y'all looking at me like that? Don't you know that every now and then Christmas can be a rough day for folk? But can I share something with you? Here's the good news of Christmas. The good news of Christmas is that God will get in it right with you. If you're brokenhearted, God is with you. If you're broke, God is with you. If you're discouraged, God is with you. If you can't see your way out, God is with you. For unto us a child killed, child is born. So let me go ahead and correct myself. Ahaz was not the northern kingdom. And then we go around to chapter number 9. It's interesting because the Lord is not done giving judgment, but the thing about Isaiah is Isaiah keeps on creeping good news in the midst of negative proclamations. And can I share something with you on today? The hope of the believer is not that get on this train and you need to go ahead and wrap this thing up, but is there anybody here that can testify in your life that God's purposes are always being worked out, whether you like somebody is working for my good? And so we learned, we celebrated on Sunday during early service that we cannot